This 4-year-old girl changes the tire on an elderly millionaire's mom's car. But when the millionaire arrives, he says, "This Ferrari is now yours." Comment what you think will happen. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. Your help is very important. The sun was beginning to set over Harmony Creek, painting the sky over Kentucky with shades of orange, when Antoinette Silver gripped the steering wheel of her beat-up pickup truck tightly, trying to maintain control of the vehicle. Sweat trickled down her forehead as she fought the tremor that was taking over the truck. In the back seat, Isabella, her 6-year-old daughter, held her school backpack tightly, her brown eyes wide with concern. "Mommy, something's wrong with the truck," Isabella warned, her small voice carrying a surprising knowledge for her age. The bang was instantaneous. The pickup truck shook violently, forcing Antoinette to stop on the shoulder of the most luxurious street in town. The tire had blown out right in front of the imposing Vasconcelos mansion, a majestic building that stood like a monument to wealth amidst the simplicity of the historic town. Antoinette looked at her watch nervously. It was 5:45 p.m. In 15 minutes, her shift would start at the hospital, where several elderly patients depended on the medications she transported in the truck. As head nurse of the geriatric ward, she couldn't afford to be late. Her mother, Grandma Z, was also waiting for her medications at home, fighting an illness that consumed her day after day. "It's okay, Mommy," Isabella said, getting out of the truck with a confidence that would surprise any adult. "Daddy taught me all about cars before he went to heaven." Antoinette felt her heart clench as she watched her little girl approach the wheel with the same determination that Carlos, her late husband, used to show. Isabella had inherited not only her father's eyes, but also his passion for mechanics, cultivated through countless videos they watched together. From the window on, the second floor of the mansion, experienced eyes watched the scene with growing interest. Theodore Vasconcelos, 78, leaned on his fine wooden cane, intrigued by the figure of the little girl who, with surprising dexterity, was already positioning the jack under the truck. The businessman felt his heart skip a beat. That child, with her determined gestures and brown hair tied in an untidy braid, was the living image of his Olivia when she was little. The resemblance was so disturbing that he needed to lean on the windowsill. His eyes turned to the girl's mother, and something in that scene reminded him of distant times when his mansion was full of life. There was something familiar about that woman, something that stirred up old, almost forgotten memories. Theodore watched as Antoinette opened the trunk, revealing organized boxes of medications. Her gestures were precise, professional, but her hands trembled slightly, betraying an anxiety that she was trying to hide from her daughter. That's when a particular sparkle caught his attention, a delicate brooch on Antoinette's hospital uniform. Even from a distance, he recognized the unique design of the jewel that his late wife, Beatrice, had specially commissioned for. "Impossible," he murmured to himself, his wrinkled hands gripping the cane tighter. At that moment, Isabella let out an exclamation of frustration. The tire was more damaged than it seemed, and even with her surprising skill, the task proved too complex for her small hands. Antoinette looked at her watch again, 5:52 p.m. Despair began to take over her face as she thought about the patients who depended on her, her sick mother waiting at home, and now this setback that threatened to crumble her carefully planned routine. That's when the imposing wooden door of the mansion opened, revealing the towering figure of Theodore Vasconcelos. Leaning on his cane, he descended the entrance steps with an agility that would surprise anyone who knew his age. "Maybe I can help," his deep voice echoed through the garden, causing Antoinette to startle and Isabella to look curiously. What none of them knew at that moment was that that flat tire wasn't just a setback. It was the first thread of a complex web of destinies that was beginning to intertwine. In the window on the second floor of the neighboring mansion, a figure watched the scene with narrowed eyes and lips pursed in disapproval. "Gertrude," Theodore's distant cousin and sole heir, felt that something was about to change in the life that she had so carefully planned for herself. The wind blew stronger, carrying with it the scent of roses from the Vasconcelos garden, as the sun continued its way to the horizon, casting ever longer shadows on that apparently mundane scene, but which held the potential to forever transform the lives of everyone involved. At that moment, however, Antoinette's only concern was getting to the hospital. She had no idea that her destiny was about to change dramatically, nor that that chance encounter would be the first chapter of a story that would shake the deepest structures of Harmony Creek. Theodore approached the truck with slow but determined steps. His experienced eyes couldn't look away from little Isabella, who remained focused on the damaged tire. The resemblance to his late daughter Olivia was so disturbing that he needed to lean harder on his cane to maintain his composure. "You shouldn't trouble yourself," Antoinette said nervously, checking her watch once more. 5:55 p.m. "We'll figure it out." But Theodore had already given a discreet signal to Sebastian, his 63-year-old chauffeur, who promptly came out of the garage with a serene expression that only years of service can provide. What caught the millionaire's attention, however, was Isabella's reaction when she saw the professional approaching with the tools. "The jack needs to be positioned exactly under the chassis," the girl explained with a disconcerting naturalness. "Daddy always said that a millimeter of difference can cause an accident." Sebastian exchanged a surprised look with his boss, while Antoinette once again felt that familiar mixture of pride and pain as she heard her daughter talk about her father. Carlos had passed away 2 years ago, but his legacy lived on through Isabella's bright eyes whenever she talked about mechanics. That's when Theodore noticed something that made his heart race. On Antoinette's hospital uniform, the brooch that had caught his attention earlier had a specific design, a rose intertwined with a lily, studded with small pearls. He knew that piece. He knew it very well. "That brooch," he began, his voice faltering slightly. "Where did you get it?" Antoinette touched the jewel instinctively, a protective gesture that didn't go unnoticed. "It was my mother's. She worked in this house many years ago before—" "Grandma Z," Theodore completed, his eyes filling with sudden understanding. "You are Grandma Z's daughter." The name seemed to hang in the air like a revelation. Sebastian, who had worked for the family for decades, momentarily stopped what he was doing, his experienced hands suspended in the air. "Yes," Antoinette replied, surprised. "Did you know my mother?" Theodore felt the weight of memories hitting him like a wave. Grandma Z hadn't been a simple employee. She had been the heart of that house for years, before he made his fortune, before everything changed. The brooch had been a gift from his late wife Beatrice, a way of thanking her for years of dedication that went far beyond domestic service. "Your mother?" He hesitated, choosing his words. "How is she?" Antoinette's face contorted into an expression of concern. "Not very well. In fact, some of these medications are for her. I really need to get home soon, but first I have my shift at the hospital and—" Theodore raised his hand, interrupting her gently. An idea was beginning to form in his mind, something that could change the course of many lives. "Sebastian," he called, his voice taking on that decisive tone that his employees knew well. "Prepare the red Ferrari." Antoinette's eyes widened, while Isabella let out an exclamation of surprise. The red Ferrari was famous in town, one of the many luxury cars in the Vasconcelos collection, but rarely seen on the streets. "No, please," Antoinette protested. "It's not necessary. As soon as we change the tire, you have patients waiting and your mother needs medications." Theodore was firm. "The Ferrari has been sitting in the garage for months. Besides," he looked at Isabella, who was now watching the conversation with attentive eyes, "I'm sure your daughter would appreciate seeing a little more closely how a car like that works." Across the street, partially hidden by a silk curtain, Gertrude watched the scene with an increasingly somber expression. At 68, she had dedicated her life to ensuring her position as Theodore's sole heir. Seeing her cousin, always so reserved, interacting in this way with strangers, set off an alarm in her calculating mind. Picking up her phone, she dialed a number she kept for emergencies. After 3 rings, a male voice answered. "Juvenal, I need your services. Immediately." Meanwhile, in the Vasconcelos garage, Isabella had timidly approached the Ferrari, her eyes shining with technical admiration. Theodore watched the girl with an interest that went beyond simple kindness. There was something about her, a genuine curiosity and a lively intelligence that painfully reminded him of his own daughter. "The engine is a V12, isn't it?" Isabella asked, surprising everyone. "Daddy showed it to me in a video once. He said it was his dream to work with cars like this." Theodore felt something break inside him. The last time someone had shown so much genuine interest in his cars had been 5 years ago, before the accident on the lake that took his family. Since then, the garage, as well as the entire mansion, had become just a repository of painful memories. "Antoinette," he said suddenly, his voice carrying a decision already made, "this car is now yours." The silence that followed was broken only by the distant sound of birds returning to their nests in the late afternoon. Antoinette opened her mouth to protest, but Theodore raised his hand again. "It's not just a gift, it's a trade." He looked meaningfully at Isabella. "Your daughter has a special gift. It would be a waste not to develop it. In exchange for the car, I would like you to visit me regularly, say once a week." At that moment, a stronger wind blew through the garden, causing the roses to stir in their beds. In the window on the second floor, Gertrude gripped the phone so tightly that her fingers turned white, and in the garage, between luxury cars and expensive tools, a small family was beginning to find hope, without knowing that they were about to face much more than they could imagine. "I accept," Antoinette replied finally, her voice trembling slightly. "But I need to get to the hospital now." Theodore smiled, a smile he hadn't given in years. "Sebastian will take you, and tomorrow you can come pick up the Ferrari. It's time for this car to have a greater purpose than gathering dust in my garage." What none of them realized was the calculating glint in Gertrude's eyes, who was already planning her next move. In the small town of Harmony Creek, news traveled fast, and she knew exactly how to use that to her advantage. While Sebastian drove Antoinette and Isabella to the hospital in his executive Mercedes, Theodore remained in the garage, his eyes fixed on the red Ferrari. For the first time in years, he felt something other than the constant pain he carried. It was hope, mixed with a renewed purpose. But little did he know that his impulsive decision had just triggered a series of events that would forever change not only his life, but that of the entire town. The news about the red Ferrari spread through Harmony Creek like wildfire. In just 3 days, nothing else was talked about in the coffee shops on Main Street and in the conversation circles after Sunday Mass. The sight of the luxurious car parked in front of the modest 2-story house where Antoinette lived with Grandma Zede and Isabella caused a stir in the neighborhood. Antoinette felt the stares as she drove through the historic streets of the town, some of admiration, others of poorly disguised envy, but what bothered her the most was the silent judgment she perceived in familiar faces. At the hospital, the whispers in the hallways increased whenever she passed. "There must be something wrong with all this," she heard one of the oldest nurses commenting in the break room. "Old man Vasconcelos has never given anything to anyone." But what truly worried her was the change in behavior of Murillo Gomez, the mayor's son. At 45, he held the position of administrative director of the hospital and had never gotten over Antoinette's rejection years ago when she chose to marry Carlos. Antoinette, he called her into his office on a particularly busy Thursday. We need to review your shift schedule. Sitting at his mahogany desk, Murillo maintained an artificial smile as he flipped through a folder of documents. Apparently, there are some irregularities in your arrival and departure times. Irregularities? Antoinette questioned, feeling her stomach sink. I've never been a minute late in 5 years of work. Times change, he replied, his gaze full of cruel satisfaction. And people who start associating with millionaires maybe shouldn't be working with controlled substances. You know how it is. Temptations might arise. The insinuation hit her like a slap. Are you accusing me of something, Murillo? Just taking care of the hospital's reputation, he smiled, closing the folder with a deliberate movement. For now, you are suspended from the controlled substances sector. You can continue with the regular patients. That arbitrary decision meant that Antoinette could no longer make her medicine deliveries in rural areas. Her elderly patients, who depended on her to receive proper treatment, would be helpless. Meanwhile, in the Vasconcelos mansion, Theodore experienced a remarkable transformation. Isabella's weekly visits had become the highlight of his days. The girl brought a light that had long been absent in those dark hallways. Did you know that you can calculate the speed of a car just by listening to the engine? Isabella explained excitedly, sitting in the private workshop where Theodore kept his old tools. Daddy taught me the mathematical formula. Theodore watched in wonder as she scribbled numbers and symbols in a notebook, her childish handwriting contrasting with the complexity of the calculations. It was like seeing his Olivia again, with that same passion for knowledge. However, not everything was rosy. Gertrude had put her plan into motion. Juvenal, the 54-year-old private investigator she hired, was already starting to gather information about Antoinette. The nurse has a clean record, he reported, sitting in Gertrude's private office. Impeccable work, no debts, highly respected. In the community, keep looking, Gertrude insisted, her fingers drumming on the marble table. Everyone has a secret, and when we find hers, my dear cousin will realize the mistake he's making. What Gertrude didn't expect was that her investigation would end up revealing something very different from what she was looking for. Juvenal, while searching the old city archives, discovered a surprising connection between the families. One particularly hot afternoon, while Isabella played in the garden under Theodore's watchful eye, Grandma Z had a severe episode. Antoinette, unable to access the controlled substances at the hospital due to the restrictions imposed by Murillo, felt completely powerless. My mother needs these medications, she pleaded at the hospital pharmacy, but the new pharmacist, recently hired on Murillo's recommendation, was inflexible. That's when Theodore, learning of the situation through Isabella, decided to intervene. He not only provided the medications through his contacts, but also began to realize that there was something very wrong with the hospital administration. Why didn't you tell me about these problems before? He asked Antoinette as they watched Grandma Z sleeping serenely after taking the medication. You've already done too much for us, she replied, the deep, dark circles under her eyes betraying sleepless nights. Besides, I don't want people to think I'm taking advantage of your kindness. At that moment, something in Grandma Z's eyes, who had woken up silently, caught Theodore's attention. It was a look of deep recognition, as if she was keeping an important secret. Theodore, the old woman called in a weak voice, do you remember that night? The fire. But before she could continue, her voice failed and she fell back asleep. Theodore felt a chill run down his spine. What fire? Why did he have the feeling that he was forgetting something important? Meanwhile, Juvenal, who was watching the house discreetly, felt for the first time in his career that he was on the wrong side of the story. The notes in his notebook revealed a pattern that deeply disturbed him. Not about Antoinette, but about Gertrude. At Isabella's school, the teacher, Claudia, 35, was impressed with the girl's extraordinary development in mathematics and science. "She has a natural gift," she commented to Antoinette during a meeting, "but our school doesn't have the resources to develop her full potential." Theodore, learning of this through Sebastian, who always took and picked up Isabella from school, began to devise a plan. Without revealing his identity, he started a donation program for the school, focused especially on equipment for science and math classes. But the apparent peace was about to be broken. One Saturday afternoon, while Isabella was showing Theodore her latest calculations on speed and acceleration, Gertrude appeared unannounced at the mansion. Her face was contorted into a mask of false concern. "Dear cousin," she began, her honeyed tone barely disguising the malice, "we need to talk about your current situation." The look she gave Isabella was loaded with a dark meaning. In her hands, a thick folder contained documents that she believed were her key to total control of the Vasconcelos fortune. What she didn't know was that, at that very moment, Juvenal was about to make a discovery that would completely change the course of events. And in Grandma Z's room, an old photo album held the key to a mystery that connected all those lives in a way that no one could imagine. The tension in the library of the Vasconcelos mansion was palpable. Gertrude stood tall, her rigid posture contrasting with the elegance of the antique furniture, while Theodore, sitting in his favorite armchair, kept Isabella protectively by his side. "What exactly do you mean by my current situation, Gertrude?" Theodore asked, his calm voice masking a growing irritation. Before she could answer, Dr. Galdino, 62, entered the library. The doctor, known for his proximity to the most influential families in Harmony Creek, carried a folder similar to Gertrude's. "Theodore, my old friend," began the doctor, his tone falsely cordial, "we are concerned about your recent decisions. Donating a Ferrari, funding school programs anonymously. This is not the behavior of a man in control of his mental faculties." Isabella, even at 6 years old, sensed the change in the atmosphere. Her intelligent eyes moved between the adults, capturing nuances that many older people would not notice. "Uncle, Theodore isn't sick," she declared suddenly, her childish voice carrying a surprising certainty. "He helped me calculate the average speed of all the cars in the garage yesterday. He even explained vectors to me." Dr. Galdino gave the girl an annoyed look, but Theodore smiled, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. "Actually, Isabella has taught me more than I have taught her." It was at this moment that Juvenal, who was watching the scene discreetly through the half-open door, felt the weight of the documents in his inner pocket. After weeks investigating Antoinette, he had discovered something very different: financial records that showed systematic diversions from the Vasconcelos companies, all linked to offshore accounts controlled by Gertrude. At the hospital, Antoinette faced her own battle. Murillo had escalated his retaliations, now demanding that she take extra shifts at the most inconvenient times. "It's either follow the new schedule or look for another job," he had said, his cruel smile barely disguised. "After all, with a car like that, you probably don't even need to work anymore, do you?" The malicious comment echoed through the hospital hallways, further fueling the rumors about her relationship with Theodore. But what no one knew was that Antoinette used the Ferrari mainly to take medications to the most remote patients, transforming the symbol of luxury into a tool to help those in need. One particularly difficult afternoon, while organizing medical records in the hospital archive, Antoinette found something intriguing: an old record of a fire in the Vasconcelos mansion, dating back to when her mother still worked there. The document mentioned a child saved from the flames, but the details were vague. Meanwhile, at the mansion, the situation was rapidly deteriorating. Dr. Galdino had presented a report questioning Theodore's mental capacity based on worrying observations of behavioral changes. "It's for your own good, cousin," Gertrude insisted, her honeyed voice hiding an immoderate ambition. "You need rest. Let me take care of everything." Theodore, however, was not the fragile man they imagined. Years of running a business empire had taught him to recognize betrayals. What worried him was not the obvious attempt to take control of his assets, but the suspicious timing. Why now? The answer came through Sebastian, who discreetly informed his boss about an important meeting of the Vasconcelos Company's board scheduled for the following week. A meeting that could expose administrative irregularities if the real owner was present. "Isabella," Theodore called softly, ignoring the others in the room. "Do you remember that broken gear we found in the old clock in the office?" The girl nodded enthusiastically. "You said no one has been able to fix it in years. How about we take a look at it now?" Dr. Galdino tried to protest, but Theodore was already getting up, leaning on his cane with a dignity that defied any suggestion of mental incapacity. In the office, while Isabella fascinatedly examined the complex mechanism of the centuries-old clock, Theodore made a discreet call. Within minutes, Antoinette arrived at the mansion, finding a tense scene. "What's going on here?" she asked, immediately noticing the charged atmosphere. That's when Grandma Z, who had insisted on coming along despite her weakness, entered leaning on a cane. Her eyes, normally tired, shone with a surprising lucidity. "I recognize that smell," she said, suddenly her nose twitching as if catching a fragrance from the past. "The same rose perfume from that night." Theodore felt a chill run down his spine. "What night, Grandma Z?" "The night of the fire," she replied, her voice trembling slightly. "When the flames started in the library, you were just a boy." The memory hit Theodore like a lightning bolt. Long repressed images returned, the heat of the flames, the paralyzing fear, and then gentle hands carrying him to safety. "It was you," he whispered, his eyes widening with understanding. "You saved me that night." At that moment, Isabella let out an exclamation of triumph. Her little hands had achieved something that experts had tried for years. The old clock came back to life, its gears turning smoothly, but it wasn't just the mechanism that she fixed. By moving one of the pieces, a secret compartment opened at the base of the clock. Inside it, documents yellowed with age contained the truth that Gertrude so feared. Detailed records of the family's financial transactions, including evidence of recent manipulations. "Impossible!" Gertrude exclaimed, her face losing all color. It was then that Juvenal chose this moment to enter, carrying his own folder of evidence. "Actually, Mrs. Gertrude, it's very possible, and I have here more evidence of your questionable activities." Dr. Galdino, realizing that the wind had changed direction, began to retreat discreetly towards the door. But Murillo, who had arrived at the mansion moments before to put even more pressure on Antoinette, chose this moment to make his triumphant entrance, without knowing that he was about to get involved in a situation much bigger than he imagined. In the midst of all this, Isabella remained focused on the clock, her eyes shining with the satisfaction of having solved a problem that adults couldn't. She didn't realize that just as she had fixed that complex mechanism, her actions were helping to fix something much bigger, the broken lives of all those people around her. The silence that followed the revelations was broken only by the soft ticking of the newly repaired clock. Theodore remained seated in his armchair, the documents found by Isabella spread on his lap, while his gaze alternated between Grandma Z and the documents yellowed by time. "All these years," he murmured, his voice choked with emotion. "You never said anything, Grandma Z." "Why?" The old housekeeper leaned more firmly on her cane, her eyes shining with restrained tears. "It wasn't just about saving a child from the fire, Theodore. That night I also saved something else." With trembling hands, she opened her old purse and pulled out a worn envelope. Inside it, more documents, even older than those found in the clock. When the flames began to consume the library, she continued, I realized that they were not accidental. Someone had started the fire to destroy these papers, the original records of your family's minds. Gertrude, who until then had maintained a posture of silent indignation, let out a strangled sound. Her face, normally controlled, now revealed, a mixture of fear and fury. "You have no proof of any of this," she hissed, but her voice betrayed her insecurity. It was then that Juvenal stepped forward, his normally neutral expression replaced by a surprising determination. "Actually, Mrs. Gertrude, we have all the necessary evidence, including about the recent diversions." The investigator began to expose his findings: spreadsheets, bank transfers, falsified documents, a whole scheme that stretched for years, long before Antoinette and Isabella arrived in Theodore's life. Murillo, realizing the gravity of the situation, tried to retreat discreetly towards the door, but Sebastian was already there, blocking the exit with his silent and imposing presence. "And as for you, Dr. Murillo," Juvenal continued, pulling more documents from his folder, "I have here interesting records about certain irregularities in the hospital, manipulation of schedules, persecution of employees, diversion of medications." Antoinette felt her heart clench. All the difficulties she had faced in recent months began to make sense. It wasn't just a matter of personal revenge, but part of a much bigger scheme. Isabella, who was watching everything with a mixture of curiosity and concern, approached her mother and took her hand. "Mommy, the clock wasn't the only thing broken here, was it?" The innocent wisdom of the child made Theodore smile, despite the seriousness of the moment. "No, little one, but just as you fixed the clock, you are helping us fix much more." It was at this moment that Grandma Z staggered slightly, the emotion of the moment being too much for her fragile health. Antoinette rushed to support her, but it was Theodore who arrived first, supporting his former housekeeper with surprising gentleness. "You didn't just save my life that night," he said softly. "You saved my family's legacy, and now your daughter and granddaughter are helping to save it again." Dr. Galdino, who until then had remained in a calculated silence, attempted one last gambit. "All of this is very moving, but we still have the issue of Mr. Vasconcelos's mental capacity." "Ah, about that," Juvenal interrupted, an ironic glint in his eyes. "I found some interesting transfers to your bank account in the Cayman Islands, Doctor. I'm sure the medical board would love to know about your customized reports." The doctor visibly paled, collapsing into a nearby armchair. Gertrude, seeing her plan crumble, made one last desperate attempt. "Theodore, we're family. Everything I did was to protect the Vasconcelos legacy." "Family?" Theodore repeated, his voice laden with an old sadness. "Family was Beatrice, my wife, who gave this brooch to Grandma Z as thanks for her loyalty. Family was Olivia, my daughter, who, like Isabella, had a special sparkle in her eyes when discovering how things worked." He paused, his eyes filling with restrained tears. "And family is what I'm rediscovering now through people who don't share my blood, but share something much more valuable: integrity, compassion, and true love." At that moment, Sebastian entered the office with a group of men in well-cut suits. The board of directors of the Vasconcelos companies, urgently convened by Theodore moments before. "Gentlemen," Theodore addressed them, his voice regaining the authority of years of leadership, "we have much to discuss. But first," he turned to Gertrude, Murillo, and Dr. Galdino. I believe we have some important calls to make. The police and the medical board will certainly be interested in our conversation today. While the events unfolded, Isabella had turned her attention back to the clock. Her little hands delicately adjusted one last gear, and when she finished, the mechanism began to play a soft melody that hadn't been heard in decades. It was Beatrice's favorite song, Theodore whispered, recognizing the melody. How did you know? I didn't know, Isabella answered simply. I just fixed what was broken. Antoinette watched the scene with tears in her eyes, realizing that her life, which seemed to be falling apart a few weeks ago, was actually rebuilding in a way she could never have imagined. Outside the mansion, the sun began to set over Harmony Creek, painting the sky with shades of pink and gold. The red Ferrari, parked in the garden, was no longer a symbol of ostentation or a cause of gossip. It had become a reminder of how fate can use the most unexpected means to mend broken hearts and reunite lonely souls. But there was still one last revelation to be made, a secret kept deep in Grandma Z's heart that would forever change everyone's understanding of the events of that distant night of the fire. And as the clock continued its soft melody, she gathered the strength to share the final truth that she had guarded for so long. Grandma Z settled back in her armchair, her elderly hands caressing a small fabric bundle that she had taken from the bottom of her purse. The office of the Vasconcelos mansion, now free from the presence of Gertrude, Murillo, and Dr. Galdino, who had been taken to give explanations to the authorities, was plunged into silent anticipation. Before I tell you the last part of this story, she began, her voice weak but determined, I need to show you something, Theodore. With trembling fingers, she untied the knot of the small bundle, revealing a small carved wooden box. Inside it, there was an old and yellowed photograph protected by a parchment envelope. Your mother gave me this to keep on the morning of the day of the fire, she explained as she passed the photo to Theodore. She had a feeling. She said something was wrong, that she had discovered something terrible about the family business. Theodore held the photograph with reverential care. In it, a young and elegant woman held a baby in her arms in front of the Vasconcelos mansion. Beside her, a much younger Grandma Z smiled at the camera. But that's not all, Grandma Z continued, her voice trembling slightly. Along with the photo, your mother gave me a letter. She knew, Theodore, she knew the fire was going to happen. A heavy silence fell over the office. Antoinette, sitting close to her mother, held her hand in support. Isabella, who had stopped tinkering with the clock, watched the scene with attentive eyes. How do you mean she knew? Theodore asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Your mother discovered that some people were diverting money from the mines, using false documents to hide the true production. When she threatened to expose everything, Grandma Z paused, taking a deep breath. They planned the fire to destroy the evidence. And you saved not only me, but also the documents, Theodore completed, beginning to understand. No, Theodore, Grandma Z corrected gently. I wasn't alone that night. Your mother, she helped me get you out of the house. It was she who gave me the documents, made me swear that I would keep them until you were old enough to understand. Silent tears began to stream down Theodore's face. But she couldn't get out. She stayed behind to make sure we could escape, Grandma Z confirmed, her own tears now flowing freely. Her last request was that I take care of you as if you were my own son. At that moment, Isabella, who had approached silently, placed her little hand over Theodore's. That's why you've always taken care of Mommy so lovingly, isn't it, Grandma? Grandma Z nodded, a sad smile on her lips. I had promised to take care of the Vasconcelos family. And when your mother was born, Isabella, it was as if the circle was complete. But then, Theodore began, a sudden understanding lighting up his face, when Beatrice gave the brooch to you. She knew, Grandma Z completed. Beatrice discovered the truth a few years after marrying you. It was she who helped me keep the secret, ensuring that I was always around, protecting the documents and protecting you." The old clock continued its soft melody, like a soundtrack to that moment of revelations. Sebastian, who had silently returned to the office, remained in a corner, discreet tears in his normally impassive eyes. "And Gertrude?" Antoinette asked softly. "Did she know about all this?" "No," Grandma Z answered. "But she always suspected that there was something more. That's why she never liked my presence, always tried to keep me away from the mansion. When she finally succeeded years ago, I thought I had failed in my promise." "But you didn't fail," Theodore said firmly, holding his former housekeeper's hands. "You did much more than you promised. You raised a wonderful daughter who in turn brought into the world this little genius who is helping us fix not only clocks, but entire lives." Isabella smiled at hearing this, but her eyes were fixed on something beyond the office window. The sun was setting, and its last rays crossed the old stained glass windows, creating a kaleidoscope of colors that danced through the room. "Look!" she exclaimed suddenly. "The colors are the same as the Ferraris." Indeed, the deep red of the car, visible through the window, seemed to capture and reflect the light of the sunset, creating an almost magical aura in the garden. "You know, Isabella," Theodore said, a genuine smile illuminating his tired face, "I think it's time to turn that garage into something more useful. What do you think of a workshop school? A place where other children can learn about mechanics, mathematics, and about how to fix broken things?" she completed, her eyes shining with excitement. "Exactly," he agreed, exchanging a meaningful look with Antoinette. "And your mother could help us manage everything, use her experience from the hospital to create special programs for children who, like you, have unique talents." Antoinette felt her heart fill with an emotion she could barely contain. From an overwhelmed and worried nurse, she had become part of something much bigger, something that could really make a difference in the lives of many people. "And what about Gertrude?" she asked, the concern still present in her voice. "She will have to answer for her actions," Theodore replied firmly. "But perhaps with time and true remorse, she can also learn to fix what she broke." At that moment, as if responding to everyone's thoughts, the clock began to play a new melody, different from the previous one. It was a song that spoke of hope, of new beginnings, of promises fulfilled through generations. "Daddy always said," Isabella commented, her childish voice laden with wisdom, "that sometimes we need to take something completely apart in order to fix it right." Theodore smiled, realizing how that little family had completely disassembled his lonely life and rebuilt it in a much more beautiful and meaningful way. Outside, the red Ferrari continued to shine under the setting sun, no longer a symbol of status or a cause of gossip, but a reminder of how fate sometimes uses the most unexpected means to unite people and heal broken hearts. And so, on that historic afternoon in Harmony Creek, as the sun said goodbye, painting the sky with colors that seemed to celebrate that moment, a new story began. A story of redemption, of second chances, of promises fulfilled through time. A story that proved that sometimes the strongest bonds are not those of blood, but those that are forged through love, loyalty, and the ability to see beyond appearances. Grandma Z, looking at her daughter and granddaughter, finally felt that she had fulfilled her promise. Not only had she protected the Vasconcelos, but she had helped create a new family, one that transcended names and fortunes, one that was destined to transform that small Kentucky town into a much more special place. And the clock continued its ticking, marking not only the hours, but the beginning of a new time for everyone.